Hi, this is Kate Valentine. I'm responding about the request you put on the police auction materials. I bought a few kids' books from that auction, actually a whole crate of them. At the time, I didn't look at them, I just put them on the bargain shelf in order of the author's names. I had never heard of the author or the book title, so I gave them all orange stickers, which meant 50 cents each. One day, it was particularly dead, so I paged through them, and I noticed this one with very simple, minimalistic drawings called Dave's Days. There was no cohesive story. Unlike other children's books that use each page as a part of a lesson, here there was none of that. One page was the Dave character sitting at a kitchen table with a mug in front of him. He was the kind of stick figure you see on bathroom doors. Dave's kitchen was written in block letters above him. The whole book was like that. Just Dave, sitting alone in one setting or another, the park, the library. I put the book away and looked through the others and found another one in the Dave series. This one was called Dave and His Friends. The cover was Dave outside his house, like the first, but next to him stood a little girl with a blonde ponytail. 2 boys and a girl, all brown-haired with freckles, looked out from the window inside the house. This book was all about Dave and these kids doing things together and going places like to the park and getting ice cream. Every time Dave did something nice for them, they'd say, "Dave is my friend." But since no one has a mouth and therefore no one is smiling, it only makes the whole thing odd, like when you read a happy text message without an exclamation mark. I put the book away. Later that night, I decided to Google the titles of the books. When I got nothing, I just Googled the things in the book, and eventually I Googled the phrase, "Dave is my friend." An article came up. It was about a girl named Jennifer Holland who had gone missing sometime earlier and about how her parents hadn't given up hope. It also alluded to police being suspicious of them as the circumstances of her disappearance were strange. They said they woke up to find their front door open and Jennifer gone. 2 things really struck me from the article. The first was that the last name Holland seemed significant. I couldn't remember why until I went back to the Dave books and saw that Dave lived in Hollandtown. The second thing, I'll get to that in a sec. After hours of searching for more information, I stumbled across a forum. I don't remember where, maybe on Reddit, but one subject said, "Has anyone read Dave and the Others?" It was a guy with the handle Oregon Ollie who had found an eerily similar book. The post was 2 years old. Later, I searched for Oregon Ollie, but his account was inactive. When he Googled the book, he didn't find anything either. But, like me, he started Googling everything in the book and found a news story, just like I had. 3 siblings had been found dead at Chipewyan Lake in Canada. They lay on the shore, holding hands. Their last name was Robin. They died from exposure. Mr. and Mrs. Robin woke up in the middle of the night by a cold wind the night their kids went missing. The door had been left wide open. It was January. The police found a note at the Robin home left by the kids, but the article said the investigators would not release the contents to the public. Oregon Ollie said that in his book, there were 3 red robins that would fly over Dave's head when he got sad. The book was mostly a man walking the city sidewalks at night or sitting at a park bench alone with the stars over him. Whenever Dave seemed sad, the robins would come and fly over his head, and he would just look up and watch. The second thing that I mentioned earlier that struck me in the first article I read was that Jennifer Holland had drawn a picture before she went missing. It was of a stick figure man and herself. Her parents didn't know what it was. She had written, "Dave is my friend," on it. I don't have the books anymore. I went back through them after reading Oregon Ollie's account, and seeing those 3 kids in the window of Dave's house freaked me out, so I threw them away. I still think about it, though. Sometimes I wish I kept them, but the thought of having them near me gives me the chills. I wasn't going to mention this, but after I read the Reddit account, I wrote my own post about it. No one ever picked up on it, but right after that, I started getting phone calls. When I answered, I would hear some electrical buzzing, but that was it. First, the calls were just at my house, but then I got them on my cell and even at work. Slowly, it died down, but I still get them from time to time. The last thought that crosses my mind when I lock my doors at night is, I wonder if it's Dave calling me. And I wonder if he's there somewhere, watching my house when I go to bed. Sometimes I move my bureau in front of the door just to be safe. Yeah.
My wife and I bought a house that was quite cheap for the area, and that was 2 years ago. We have 2 daughters together. At first, everything was fine, and nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. Then one day we would find every chair, pot, jar and other household objects all divided into 2 corners. One corner of the household objects had a red mark on them, while the other half of household objects had a blue mark. We tried putting things back to where they were supposed to go, but everything ended up being divided into their corners again. Then one day I awoke with a blue mark on my arm, and same with my oldest daughter. We both found ourselves with the other household objects that also had a blue mark on them. My wife and my youngest daughter had a red mark on them, and they awoke alongside the household objects that had a red mark on them as well. We then brought in a psychic, and she told us that the spirits from the married couple who used to live in this house are now finally divorcing in the afterlife. They have split up everything 50-50 and marked them red and blue. Red is for the deceased husband, and the blue is for the deceased wife. My wife and I looked at each other, as we both knew we would be taken away. We knew we had to get out of this house or sell it as quick as possible. Then one day, some of the household objects that were divided into red and blue had disappeared. Our daughters were part of the disappearance. The 2 spirits are slowly taking their 50-50 divorce splits. Me and my wife are just waiting for us to get taken now. Me and my husband were driving one night. I remember it well, as it was snowing heavily. We were driving through the snow, and it seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. I remember my husband saying, "Hey sweetie, this snow is getting heavier and heavier." With that suddenly there was a screech, and the car skidded on black ice. The car toppled over, but luckily we both survived. We didn't even have to be hospitalized. A week later, I was looking through getaway breaks, and I thought it a good idea to me and my husband leave our town for a week and go to stay in a cabin in the woods out in Utah. We drove there in a new car that my husband bought because he needed a car to drive to work 2 miles from where we live. We were driving out to the woods for what seemed like days, but in reality was only hours. When we got there, we were in awe of how beautiful the cabin looked, with the trees surrounding it. It was just a beautiful sight. My husband stopped the car and turned off the engine. When we got out, he said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No. What is it?" He smiled and he said, "Absolutely beautiful silence." That night we had decided to go for a walk in the woods. My husband heard it first. There were footsteps behind us, but when we turned around, there was nothing. We walked on, then suddenly I heard it this time. When we turned around, there was a person dressed in black, wearing a hoodie. I screamed, and my husband said, "What the hell are you following us for?" There was a man's voice. "Let's play a game called The Hunt. It's kind of like a game of hide and seek on steroids, or maybe hide and seek on acid. I will give you a head start of 10 seconds to get the hell out of here, and after that I'm coming after ye with my gun, and I'm going to shoot ye both dead." We didn't bother ask any questions and just ran and ran as fast as we could. As we were running down the road, I was counting down the seconds, and exactly when I reached 10, I heard running behind us. Suddenly there was a shot, and I fell to the ground in pain. Then the man shouted, "This is no fun. Ye can at least make it a little hard for me. I'll tell ye what, I will give the bitch 60 seconds to recover and to get the hell out of here, and after that I'm coming to hunt ye down and shoot ye dead." My husband shouted at him, "Get away, you crazy bastard!" The man shouted back, "Is it a wise idea to really waste time like that?" I eventually got up and put my arm around my husband, and after a minute we were just down the road a little bit when my husband screamed as a bullet hit him right in the back of his leg. He buckled down in the ground in pain. The bullet had hit the back of his kneecap. I was screaming as the man walked right up to my husband. Then the man put the gun right to my head and said to my husband, "Would you like me to kill your wife?" Blood was pouring from my shoulder where I was shot. The man said to me, "You have something to tell your husband, don't you? Something about the crash." I said to my husband, "I was pregnant." Then the man said, "Okay, tell him the real story." Then I turned to my husband and said, "Those bullets that were shot at us, well, I got shot by a red paint bullet, and you got shot with a real bullet. That's why I didn't feel pain getting shot, even though, of course, you thought I did. But you felt the pain. But that pain you're feeling isn't half as bad as when I lost my baby in the car you crashed." The man pointed the gun at my husband and said, "My baby you killed." And he shot my husband in his head. Two police officers were driving down the road on a quiet summer night when they spotted something strange. There was a car stopped at the side of the road, but it was in a position that a car shouldn't stop in since it was out in the middle of the road. Two of the police officers walked around to the car to investigate, and they nearly got sick when they realized what they saw. They had seen a woman lying lifeless inside the car with towels stuffed into her body and most of her organs removed. One of the police officers turned around and got sick, but the other was more experienced and was used to seeing sick things, so he just took out his notebook and started writing down notes. Then he rang back to the station to call in the crime scene. The police officers wondered what type of sick person could do that to anyone. They wondered, was it some dark ritual or even a sacrifice taking the baby out of the body, because there were really strange stories around the town for years and years of witchcraft rituals in the woods, and this road was by the woods. When they went back to investigate more looking into the car, they felt a strange presence, and when they looked back into the back seat, they froze in fear of what they saw. They turned around and saw a baby stare at them, and not cry or whimper, but they still knew the baby was alive. They couldn't comprehend how the baby got into the car, and also wondered how the baby could have survived being taken out of the mother's body. The two officers seemed to be in a daze. When they took the baby out of the car, one of the officers realized there was a newspaper article stuck in the baby's hand. It was as if the baby was clutching onto it for dear life. The newspaper article was about a serial killer that died in prison 2 days ago, and before his death he became obsessed with being reborn through a human sacrifice. It sounded sick, so he didn't read on. One of the officers had a crazy idea he didn't tell anyone, but since he had the opportunity he went ahead with it, and knew people in the right places, so he got someone to run a DNA test on the baby. A shiver ran up his spine when he realized a hit came up on file, which was the same match as the murderer who wrote the notes about being reborn through a human sacrifice. The story begins in the year 1899, when a monstrosity of a lighthouse was built in an island off Ireland. The weather and storms surrounding the area were lethal, and some say at the worst of times there would be waves 100 feet high. This lighthouse had to have people working there, but it was taken into account when building the lighthouse that if they did have one person living there, they would be so lonely and it would affect them so much being isolated, it would drive them mad. But if there were two, then them being together out in the middle of nowhere, it could drive them to kill each other. So that is what made it clear there would be 3 people working in the lighthouse. It went according to plan until 1900, when a photographer and his assistant and a very skilled sailor sailed out to the island, so the photographer could take photos of the lighthouse keepers and the lighthouse and island. It was then that everything got very strange, as they turned every stone in the island, looking all over for the 3 men, but couldn't find a trace of them. It was like they disappeared into thin air. It was not like them to have been swept away by being outside, as they usually always would go inside and bolt the door and stay in when it became evening, as they knew how dangerous the weather could get. The photographer was thinking of writing a story about the strange disappearance when suddenly he realized there was a crumpled up piece of paper in the room that he hadn't noticed before. He opened the paper and it had written on it, "I will help you solve the mystery of the Lighthouse Keepers and their fate. Wait outside the lighthouse at 4 p.m. The photographer was standing outside the lighthouse, hoping it was the right part, as it was so big. He was really anxious to find out who wrote the note and what they would say. There was no one on the island when they went looking, and they looked everywhere. Plus, the island wasn't that big. Suddenly, it got very stormy, and he could see a huge wall of water coming straight for him. It was then he realized that he wasn't only going to learn how the men died, but die exactly the same way. Just before the wave hit him, he saw the 3 ghosts of the men right in front of him.